Dr. Mahmoud Abu Nujaila, who was killed in an Israeli airstrike on Awda hospital, wrote a message many months ago on a whiteboard in the hospital normally used for planning surgeries. And I quote him, whoever stays until the end will tell the story. We did what we could. Remember us. Remember us. We owe them more than remembrance. At the start of this year, I also wish to convey our sincere congratulations to the elected members of the Security Council now taking forth their responsibilities: Denmark, Greece, Pakistan, Panama, and Somalia. As proven in the past year, the elected members have a very important role to play in ensuring the Council upholds its charter duties, and we assure them of our full cooperation. We also thank the briefers, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, Dr. Richard Peppercorn of the WHO, and Dr. Tanya Haj Hassan for their important briefings and compelling testimonies to the Council. I listened today, Dr. Haj Hassan, as I listened to you at the end of November when you addressed the United Nations during the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. You are a great humanitarian, and you are very faithfully were able to convey some of the messages of the Palestinian people from the Gaza Strip, from the heart of a super humanitarian to the minds and hearts of those who are responsible for the maintenance of international peace and security. On behalf of the Palestinian people, I thank you, and on behalf of the people, our people, especially in the Gaza Strip, I thank you very much. Mr. President, the image of Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya wearing his white gown medical overcoat, symbol of hope and humanity, summoned and walking towards Israeli tanks, embodying death and destruction, will remain forever a reflection of what is at stake in Gaza. Humanity itself, it will show a people standing up against all odds in the face of terrible suffering, trauma, and death. And it will show how lonely they were in that moment. Palestinian doctors and medical personnel are fighting to save human lives and losing their own. They are fighting a battle they cannot win, and yet they are unwilling to surrender and to betray the oath they took. They are trying to save lives while hospitals are under attack, while medical personnel are, together with their patients and people seeking shelter, besieged and killed, while buildings and works, even for mothers and newborn babies, are being destroyed, while access to medicine is being denied, while electricity is cut, while starvation is imposed, and while they know that the people they are trying to heal will most probably die, and that they, the doctors, will be held responsible by Israel for the ultimate crime of trying to preserve life in Gaza, and will be detained, tortured, and even killed. And yet, they continue trying. Dr. Mahmoud Abu Nujaila, who was killed in an Israeli airstrike on Al-Awda hospital, wrote a message many months ago on a whiteboard in the hospital normally used for planning surgeries. And I quote him, whoever stays until the end will tell the story. We did what we could. Remember us. Remember us. We owe them more than remembrance. Nothing can explain that for 15 months Palestinians in Gaza have endured hell and been abandoned to this fate. Nothing justifies that the doctors who were trying to save lives of victims have become themselves the victims, and that the international community was not able to match even part of their courage and of their dedication to humanity. Dr. Adnan Al-Bursh wrote, and I quote, "We will die standing, and we will not kneel. All that remains in the valley are its stones, and we are its stones." End of quotation. Dr. Adnan Al-Bursh was the head of orthopedics at Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital. He became a familiar face across the globe as his videos showed him operating on the injured and the dying with little or no equipment, or digging mass graves with his colleagues in the yard of the hospital, and finally facing the Israeli assault in a hospital where thousands had sought safety. The Israeli army ordered Al-Shifa, its patients, staff, and approximately 50,000 displaced people sheltering in the compound to evacuate before setting the hospital on fire. Instead of fleeing, Dr. Al-Bursh made his way to the Indonesian hospital in northern Gaza, where he worked until that too came under fire in November. But refusing to renege on his oath, he moved to Al-Awda hospital, where he was eventually arrested by the Israeli occupation forces. 4 months later, over-prison guards dragged Al-Bursh and dumped him in the prison yard, naked from the waist down, bleeding and unable to stand, according to a deposition collected by Israeli human rights organizations. He died shortly thereafter. The death of Dr. Al-Bursh while in Israeli custody is not a solitary case. Other doctors and many other detainees died while in custody after having suffered from abuse, torture, and rape. Mr. President, this is not a war. and Dr. Tonya has indicated. This is an assault against Palestinian existence. Its target is therefore life itself in Gaza, and all those who are trying to sustain it, all those trying to ensure survival in the midst of this genocide. And according to this criminal intent, it is therefore logical that medical personnel, doctors, nurses, paramedics are among its primary victims. This is immoral. I repeat, this is immoral, unbearable, and must be stopped. The entirety of international humanitarian law rests on a fundamental rule: affording protection to those not taking part or no longer taking part in hostilities. First and foremost, civilians, the sick and the wounded and those detained. Instead of upholding the cardinal principle of distinction, Israel systematically resorts to indiscriminate attacks when it does not deliberately target those afforded protection under international law. Time after time, the same acts, the same patterns, the same criminal and inhumane conduct. Assaults against hospitals leading to the death and detention of civilians, including babies and children who are already experiencing hell on earth. No one should grow accustomed to these horrors. Israel wants to normalize genocide. The report of OHCHR clearly indicates that, and I quote, "The attacks on hospitals often followed a similar pattern involving missile strikes on hospital buildings, the destruction of hospital facilities, shooting of civilians, sieges, as well as temporarily taking over hospital buildings." End of quotation. And this is without addressing, again, and I quote, "the many cases of arbitrary detention, enforced disappearance, and ill treatment of medical personnel and other Palestinians, including internally displaced persons, IDPs, taken into custody from inside hospitals, which has been reported on elsewhere." End of quotation. This is a barbaric, and it should lead not only to repeated expression of outrage, but rather to resolute action for accountability to prevent the reoccurrence of such horrors. As warned by UN experts, and I quote, "Under occupation, intentional assaults on healthcare facilities have the potential to expose individuals to cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment, and many constitute a war crime. In Gaza, this is clearly part of a well-established pattern of genocide for which Israel leaders will have to be held accountable." End of quotation. There is no justification for the commission of war crimes. There is no justification for the commission of crimes against humanity. There is no justification for the commission of the crime of genocide. No justification whatsoever. The ICJ provisional measures, orders aimed at preserving the right of the Palestinian people to be protected from acts of genocide, have not only been disregarded by Israel, they have been blatantly breached, materializing the risk instead of addressing it. Mr. President, Israeli action can only be understood in the context of the real goals of this war. Remember, we talked about the report of the generals, which we don't talk about it anymore. Israeli officials and military commanders have often confessed to them. For anyone willing to hear, Some they don't want to hear. They like to hear what they like to hear. Israeli occupation soldiers described the actions and instructions of their division chief, division commander of Division 252, Brigadier General Yehuda Vach, stated to Haaretz that his aim was to flatten as much of Gaza as possible to forcibly displace some 250,000 Palestinians who were still present in northern Gaza to take over the land. He's building a private militia from settlers, from relatives, from fanatic soldiers to destroy every day 50, 60 buildings in the Gaza Strip, not to allow Gaza being a place for a single Palestinian to live in it. He was clear that they needed to, and I quote, according to Haaretz, make things hard on convoys that entered and harassed them. Not only there are thieves who steal the trucks, the Israeli soldiers are watching and facilitating this behavior. Insisting, and I continue the quotation, there are no innocents in Gaza. For those of you who think that this is a war against Hamas and not against the Palestinian people, a general, brigadier general, currently in the Israeli army, head of Division 252, there are no innocents in Gaza. Free game, every individual in the Gaza Strip, the Palestinian people. But his greatest insanity, in the words of one officer of the occupation army, and I quote, was the one about moving the Gazans southward and taking land, as much land as possible. End of quotation. It is a war against the Palestinian people. It is a war of genocide to eliminate as many as possible and to allow the situation in Gaza to be not inhabitable by any individual. They don't want Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and later on in other parts of the occupied territory. Evacuation orders and destruction of civilians' infrastructures, including hospitals, and killings and maiming of civilians, including doctors, have to be understood in this context. Either the Palestinians are displaced or they are destroyed. There is no other option, ethnic cleansing or genocide, and for the time being, it has meant both. Mr. President, the images are out there for all to see of repeated assaults against our hospitals as part of the assault on Palestinian life and Palestinian existence. You can see such assaults also in the West Bank by the Israeli occupation forces. They keep claiming the use of human shields. They say Hamas used the people in Gaza as human shields, saying how outrageous it is for combatants to use human shields or to pretend to be civilians when their occupation forces have done both repeatedly. With occupation forces sometimes disguised as civilians, as patients, even pretending to be pregnant women seeking care with her relatives, have conducted military raids against and within hospitals. That is their behavior. For those who try to lecture to you that others are using civilians and human shields, these evidence, these stories were documented and some were caught in the action. We salute all medical practitioners, from around the world who have volunteered to help our people in Gaza, as well as all those who have expressed solidarity and provided support to their colleagues in Palestine. Your moral voices give hope to the Palestinian people and all those who cherish and seek to preserve humanity. Everyone needs to choose if they stand by hope and humanity as embodied by the white coat worn by doctors around the world, or if they stand with destruction and death. And those who say they have made the right choice need to act accordingly. Mr. President, Dr. Hussam Abu Safiyyah stated a few weeks before this ultimate assault on the Kamal Udwan Hospital, and I quote, "I refuse to leave the hospital and sacrifice my patients. So the army punished me by killing my son. I saw him die at the entrance gate of the hospital. It was a great shock. I found a grave for him near one of the hospital's walls so that he could stay close to me." End of quotation. Dr. Abu Safiyyah was himself injured, and now he has been abducted, detained, his fate unknown. He refused to leave the victims behind. Can't we display some degree of that same courage? The plight of Dr. Hussam Abu Safiyyah, who must be immediately released, is but one story from Gaza, among an infinite number of stories of unimaginable loss and trauma, and ache and suffering, and courage and resilience. A story of a people who, while receiving solidarity of peoples and countries around the world, feel abandoned to a terrible fate, enduring a never-ending hell. It is our collective responsibility to bring this hell to an end. It is our collective responsibility to bring this genocide to an end. We have a duty to save lives. This council, you, have an obligation to save lives. Palestinian doctors and medical personnel took that mission to heart at the peril of their lives. They did not abandon the victims. Do not abandon them. End Israeli impunity. End the genocide. End this aggression immediately and unconditionally now. And I thank you, Mr. President.